before there was bracketology, and my method of doing it would be I would sit down in a Denny's or a McDonald's or whatever, and I would have the USA Today that had all the conference standings in. They used to print it once a week, all the conference standings.
Yep.
And I would put a little mark by the teams that I thought were worthy of getting in. That was the extent of it. And then when Joe Lunardi essentially invented the science, if you want to call it that, I was there. I was like the Dr. Watson in the room, so to speak. We were working with Chris Dortch at Blue Ribbon, the Blue Ribbon College Basketball Yearbook, and we were doing, and I wasn't part of the editing staff, but I was a major contributor as a writer for, we were doing a preview for March Madness. So you had to have, it had to be done like Sunday night, early Monday morning, so it get shipped out to people so they could be in their hands by like Wednesday. And so Joe basically invented bracketology so that he would have an idea, okay, how many stories do we really need to have ready in case so-and-so and so-and-so gets in? And so he needed to know. And so that's when he started to really dive into all those numbers. And I'm like I said, I'm not saying that I contributed to that other than I was ready to type whenever they said, yeah, Cincinnati. But I was in the room where it happened, so to speak. And I've known Joe, for nearly 40 years now, and a good friend of mine. And I'm really thrilled for him. He's got a book out now on bracketology, and I'm really happy for him. And, if he hadn't done that, it wouldn't have developed for me as a chance to do it at Fox. So grateful to him as well.
If he didn't trademark the words last four in, first four out, next four out, he's crazy. I'm just telling you.
He didn't even trademark bracketology. It was his. He should have jumped all over that. But at least he finally has it on a book, so he'll probably make some money out of it.
Good. Well, all right. So let's just think about this. So in the old days, folks, your biggest things were RPI, which was the ratings percentage index, which could be gamed, not easily, but could be gamed. Like you could, if you played a lot of teams that were going to win a lot of games, it really worked to your favor in the non-conference, and just the way it worked. And it was useful for a long time before it became not so useful. And then we invented the net, and the net is I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the net is, but what it is a marriage between predictive metrics. Okay. Predictive metrics. So let's just name them, right? Ken Pomeroy ratings, Jeff Sagarin ratings, the BPI that ESPN has, right? Those are three of the big ones.
Right.
So what that does is it basically looks at your body of work. Help me out. Can you put that in a capsule? I've never paid that much attention to how Jeff does his, but Ken's is basically you're basically a continuing rolling formula of like the game kind of never ends. It's what you did each possession of each game. And so winning and losing is not of great consequence. If you win big, it counts. If you lose by a lot of games against really good teams by very narrow margins, you're going to come out well in his metric. And the RPI capped margin of defeat, margin of victory.
Yeah, but it's capped pretty high. So like when the NCAA last year for the net tried to cap it at 10, they didn't like how it worked, so they changed that. But that's kind of how his deal works. And speaking of being in the room where it happened, in 2017, 18, somewhere around there, January, I can't remember the exact year, they had a meeting because they understood that their fan base was rebelling against the RPI. The metric just wasn't working for them. And it was much, much too heavily weighted towards your schedule and not enough to how you actually played. Whether winning or losing or how you played possession to possession like Ken measures, it wasn't weighted enough toward that. The formula was always off. And so they had Ken and Jeff Sagarin and Jerry Palm from CBS, and a gentleman from ESPN whose name I can't remember, and Andy Glockner, who wrote a book on NBA analytics and used to work at ESPN. And they invited me, not because I could do math, because I can't, but because I live here and because I have obviously great interest in the process. And so they felt like it would be good to have a basketball person in the room. And they were trying to get ideas about how they could make a better metric. And what was really curious about that is that almost everybody in the room, the math guys, almost every one of them came down to the point where they said, look, don't try to marry these two concepts. It doesn't work. I think Kevin Palgo, you mentioned him, he was there
Yes.
also. Don't try to marry these two concepts. The predictive metrics and the results metrics, don't try to stick them in the same box. Understand what each one does and move from there.
And let's just stop there for a second before you go back to the rest of that meeting. And results-based are strength of record with ESPN, and Kevin Pagua's KPI, which actually looks at your resume and rates your resume. A little bit different than strength of record. Strength of record is, essentially results-based. Did you win or lose? Okay, right. So you're still at the meeting, and they're saying,
and that was the general consensus of that group was, don't try to marry them. Don't try to stick the both different kinds of analytics into the same box. And the other prevailing thought that came out of that was, if you're going to do this and you're trying to marry them in a sense, use the results-based metrics to pick the teams. You should get in based on what you accomplish, how many games you win against really good opponents in the most difficult circumstances. Who'd you play? Where'd you play? How'd you do?
I agree. Yeah, it's good.
That's the shorthand. And then once you have 68 teams, then order them on the bracket based more on the predictive metrics, the power metrics. If a team is winning by a lot often, it must be pretty powerful, like Gonzaga. And I think that's a reasonable approach, because what you're trying to do when you're seeding a tournament, what the idea is that these teams, Gonzaga, Baylor, Michigan, Illinois, have earned the opportunity to have the clearest possible path to the championship round. They still have to play the games, but it's not fair to them to make them play Iowa in the second round. So that's the idea. And that's where the power metrics make sense. And I really thought that would have been a good approach for them to come out and say, okay, we came to this meeting, we did this meeting, we're going to find a metric we really like in terms of predictive. We're going to find a metric we really like in terms of results-based, and maybe even create their own. I have no problem with that. But the net basically marries the two.
Yeah, I was just going to say
the opposite of what was recommended. They feel like they have gotten a formula that works. It doesn't not work. It's certainly, and the reason I say that is because it's a vast improvement on the RPI. You look at the RPI now and see where teams are, and you think, how did we live with this for 30 years? I mean, because it just doesn't, like it. We've been trained now to think in the net sense or the sense, and then you see the RPI and you compare it against that, and it's like reading like the Dead Sea Scrolls. It just doesn't. It doesn't fit with the modern language.
I'm always fascinated on some of the intricacies and what's going on. And so they went out and they married the predictive and the results-based metrics. And that's how they come up with your net score. And, but they don't necessarily just pick off the net score. It's not an absolute, which really allows for the eye test, for subjective. I know people on the committee that have their own formula, like Greg Eaton did, or like you do, and so it's not an exact science, nor should it be. And especially this year, which has got to be the most infuriating year to try and pick a field. But at the same time, there's still a lot of wiggle room. And I'm not so sure that the people in the selection area wanted an absolute, like you're like, okay, we're going to use the results-based to get you in, and then we're going to use predictive to seed you. I don't think they wanted way more. They wanted more wiggle room than that, shall we say?
Well, I think, but that doesn't prevent you from still. I'm not an eye test person. I don't think it should ever be part of it. But it's certainly going to be subjective when you look at Iowa's resume and you see they beat this team and this team, and then you look at, say, Alabama's resume and they beat this team, and this team, and lost. So it still is analytical and it still is subjective. But the food that is fueling that examination is, well, Iowa beat the number 6 team and the number 8 team and the number 10 team, and what's the metric that establishes that value versus Alabama's group? That's where the hard analytics comes in, is the value assigned to the team that they beat versus the other team's victories. And so it wouldn't make sense if one were to sit down and look at Illinois' schedule and who they beat, and Alabama's schedule and who they beat, and just say, well, I think Tennessee's better than Ohio State, and I think Missouri's better than Wisconsin. So that's how I mean, at that point, it's just guessing.
Yeah.
There has to be something behind it. And that's where I do think it could have worked better to do that, to find a results metric for that is the foundation of the selection process, and then a predictive metric that's the foundation of the seeding process.
I like that.